like the number of times that I've read over these many years I've been painting that, painting is dead. In the magazines, like headlines, whenever there's a kind of a new conceptual movement, or whenever there's an element, again, to do with computer art, they always want to make these kind of blanket statements about things. And one of the factors that is exactly as it is in music is that if it's good, it's timeless, and it is revisitable. And that's what you want in art, is something that you can revisit and find something because you are different.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of I Know This Guy, the podcast where we dive deep into the lives of some of the most interesting people I know. Before we get started, please like and subscribe to I Know This Guy wherever you get your podcasts. By the way, my kids want me to say something about ringing a bell. What the hell's a bell?
So, Dad, who do we have lined up for the podcast?
All right, do you remember Marianita and Marcelo from Brazil?
Yeah, the power duo.
The power duo, yeah. They recommended another really great person, David Taborn. And he's a world-renowned artist. And from the get-go, he's known what he wanted to do all of his life. And he's done it. So he's done nothing but create art. How's that?
It's pretty rare and incredible.
Yeah, and he's a really cool guy, too. So I can't wait to talk to him.
Yeah, let's dive in.
All right, David. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
One of the things we always get into right off the bat with any of our guests is we want to hear their backstory and, find out what makes them them. So why don't we start with that? What makes David David?
I often wonder, I seem to have been blessed with serendipity, throughout. So I seem to have stumbled from one thing to another in a very fortunate way. I mean, I was my early memories are I was brought up in what they called a kind of slum clearance area, where buildings that were about to be torn down. So it was a very kind of poor area. And in fact, I think one of the kind of performative elements of my early years was at the bottom of my street was a 20-foot wall, and the bottom of the other street was a 20-foot wall and another 20-foot wall, because we had Winson Green Prison, we had the local psychiatric unit, and we had the hospital. So we had 3 walls surrounding the street that I lived. And what that meant was that every so often, someone would be walking along in pajamas, and we wouldn't know which wall they'd escaped from. And I remember on one occasion, and always, if somebody escaped, a mounted policeman would arrive, like your mounted police. And I remember one day there was some kind of kerfuffle, and my friend's father came out in his pajamas. It was early morning, to see what the rumpus was about. And of course, he got arrested because they thought he'd escaped from, either the prison or the psychiatric unit or the hospital, one of the 3. So I always have this kind of lovely memory, really, of the theater of my kind of early years, which was very good. So anyway, that's I suppose what started, but also, my father was a tool maker and my mother was a seamstress, and neither of them were able to take advantage of further education. And for some reason, I managed to pass the 11 plus, which we have here, and go to what was called a technical grammar school there, which was really great. So it meant that, I had books and things, because there was only ever one book in the house. And it wasn't even an encyclopedia. It was called a cyclopedia, not even an encyclopedia, So it had kind of limited amount of information in it, mainly photographs of gorillas and things inside. So it didn't do me too much good, except that, although we didn't have kind of very much money, we had a dictionary, and my father and I used to sit and find odd words and ask each other how to spell them, and then try and work out what the definitions were for these words. So, and in the meantime, he would be doing portraits of me in the margin of the newspaper. So there was always that kind of background connection with some, not suspended disbelief, but some kind of otherness, that we were kind of, I suppose, all of us looking for then. But anyway, I went to this school, and I found out I was quite good at rugby. So, I loved playing rugby a lot. Even though I probably got injured more than most. And in fact, I always remember the scrum collapsing, and I came out the scrum, and my elbow was, the bone was sticking somewhere else through the skin, and the teacher took me to this hospital, and they did all kinds of stuff, and then he wanted to drop me off at home, and most of the other students, or the pupils there, were very kind of middle class, and so they lived in a road, not a street, and I was a little bit embarrassed, So I kept saying to him, "Look, just drop me off here. I'll walk the rest of the way." But anyway, he insisted on dropping me back, and then I think that as well is when I realized that something like that, has a silver lining, in that you get mentioned in assembly, you get people scrawling their name on the cast on your arm. The girls are very sympathetic. It was win-win. Yeah. All of that. So anyway, that was basically what happened there. At school, because it was a technical grammar school, we did mainly kind of sciences and maths and stuff. And because I was quite good at maths, my father had taught me logarithms when I was very young, because he needed to use it in his work. So I was quite okay with numbers, which meant that the careers officer, I always remember saying, "Oh yes, we found you a future here, young Taborn, study accountancy." So they found me this job as a trainee accountant, and so I started to go there, and I realized that I was falling asleep at like 5 o'clock when I got back home, and I thought, this can't be right. I was 17, full of libido and lots of energy, but not for accountancy. So, not wishing to disappoint my parents, I applied for a job in Germany, because I'd learned German at this school as well. So I kind of did okay with German. So I thought, if I apply for a job in Germany, then I can go over there, and then I can kind of transmogrify, I can metamorphose into some, poetic, Byron-esque person, with maybe the hint of a personality. And so I went over there and got this job as a bookkeeper in the Kornwestheim Schuhfabrik, where, of course, they made shoes. And again, another signal moment for me was when I had this comptometer. You won't know what a comptometer is, but anyway, I'll tell you. It's a little machine that's a bit like a calculator, except it's purely mechanical, and it spews out all the numbers on a roll of paper. So I found out that using the noughts and the ones and a few other numbers, I could draw pictures on this thing. So, I was supposed to be kind of adding numbers and stuff like that. So, but anyway, I did all these little drawings. And then one day the supervisor came around, and he couldn't work out the calculations I was making. But then he noticed that they all began to form in a kind of pixelated way, some image, sometimes a landscape, sometimes a self-portrait. So anyway, as a reward, he gave me the sack, and off I went. Fortunately, at that time as well, I had moved into this house, into this room in a house where the landlord, I was doing drawings here and there, and he liked the drawings, and he said, "Well, don't pay me any rent. I've got lots of relatives with houses in the nearby district. Every month, I'll drive you out, and then you do a drawing, and that's your rent." So I thought, well, that's really great. So I did that. Meanwhile, this is all to do with how I came to be a professional artist, I suppose. And then when I was in the guest house, the kind of the pub there were a lot of Americans there, a lot of GIs. And so, as a relief from me having to speak German all the time, I started to speak to some of the GIs and met this sergeant who saw me drawing one day and said, "Oh, could you do a mural for the PX in Ludwigsburg?" So I said, "Yes, but I don't really have many materials." So the next day he sent round this thing. I'd never seen a vehicle like it. It had caterpillar wheels at the front and like a lorry at the back. It was a strange kind of hybrid vehicle, and this big guy, a massive person he was. He said, "Oh, I've come to pick you up to take you to Ludwigsburg to pick up some materials." So we went there. We got canvases, we got paint, got everything I needed. And so then I did my first proper commission, which was 7 foot. I think it was about 7 foot by 3.5 foot landscape for the PX, which also meant that I was honorary employee of the American Army, which meant that, they had this, I don't know if you have it in Canada, but they had this system over there when I was there that on the last day of the month, before they're due to get paid again, because everybody's spent out, they would have a night where everything was free, burgers, Coca-Cola, music, the lot in the PX. So I was allowed to go to that as well and visit this kind of little America, full of, jukeboxes and twirly lights and really fantastically high cholesterol food that was so addictive and loads of sugar everywhere. So that was, I suppose, the way it began to dawn on me that I could do things that I enjoyed and reap the rewards from it. So that was it basically. I mean, I tried to study at the Stuttgart Academy, but there were no grant systems there, so I couldn't do that. And so that's when I came back to England to apply to an art college, because I realized that really I couldn't be an autodidact without getting overdrawn intellectually. So, I thought I'll go to college, and then I came back, and that's when I started to study as an art student. That was a long, drawn-out beginning. Sorry about that.
No, that's perfect. Matter of fact, I've got a couple questions. So first of all, you said something at the very beginning about I was on a road and they were on streets. What's the difference?
Oh yes, I suppose you wouldn't. Well, the thing is, in the mornings, you go in, and the teacher would read out addresses, and the posh addresses were always road, avenue, close, something like that, something very sweet, but in Birmingham, which is where it was, then the streets were the ones that had no front garden. You opened onto the pavement. They were built really, as part of the latter part of the Industrial Revolution. So they were basically two up and two down houses with no gardens or anything like that, and it meant that on the roll call every morning they would go through to check the addresses of people, and I would be the only one from a street, and so it just kind of it. I don't know if it embarrassed me. Yeah, I have to be frank about that. I just felt very underprivileged, even though I was totally spoiled by my parents. Having incidentally been rejected by my mother at birth. Yeah, and in fact, I think she brought up the placenta for quite a few months before she realized the mistake. But it was to do with the fact that she'd always wanted a daughter, and I had two brothers. And I arrived, and she said she said to the nurse, "Oh no, not another son," and instantly felt guilty, which I played upon from the before I could even walk. I'm sure that I exploited her sense of guilt, in order to gain that extra little bit of love.
Well, there you go, Hayden.
Yes. I can see that's going to strike a chord. I can see the tears in your eyes. Yeah.
We're going to have another podcast.
Yes. Yeah. The sequel.
What was the other question I was going to ask? I know. Oh, I know. It wasn't a question. This is a comment. Just before I turned on the computer to get onto this podcast, I was watching this show, and it sounds like, it's going to sound like I'm going down a different rabbit hole, but you were mentioning you were reading the dictionary, and I was absolutely amazed by what this documentary was talking about. We were talking about William the Conqueror, and how William the Conqueror over the first 20 years ended up reestablishing the language as we speak it by entering 50% or getting rid of 50% of the old English words. So the English that we know right now started to be, 50% of the language was French. And they started going through this list of words, and I went, oh my gosh, I had no idea that's how Old English was ripped apart, and how a new language was basically created with the culture basically overnight, within a decade or two, which is pretty amazing. So when you were saying you were looking at the dictionary, I'm just sitting there, it just kind of hit me that, wow, that dictionary is 50% probably either Latin or French words. Kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, one of the things that intrigued me about studying German was the way in which they almost had a poetry bypass when it came to creating a unique new word. Everything was a description of the function. So, television, for instance, used to be Fernsehapparat, which is far-seeing apparatus instead of television. And in fact, one of the books that I did, which we'll deal with later perhaps, but one of the books that I worked on related to a German word that was invented to cover the condition of mad cow disease. And anyway, so you had this new word, which was 27 letters long in German to describe mad cow disease. And a couple of years ago, they decided to redact it, to take it out, because mad cow disease was cured. So they don't need to waste their ink on this new word. And so they got rid of it. So I think basically, you have this strange tidal situation with words, which makes it very interesting. And every so often you do get that kind of reactionary behavior that you describe, because similarly, it wasn't too long ago in France, where they banned the importation of English words like le weekend and so on. They wanted to get back to proper French. and not rely on the importation of either Americanisms or English words for that. And so I think it's constantly being abused and misused in order to help people articulate their agenda, their position, which in itself is fascinating. Just as a slight aside there, because one of my inspirations for, I suppose, any conceptual input in the work I do is Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and which is, I've used his approach to liminality in the work. That is, there's quite a famous example that he uses, the duck and the hare. Where you have a cartoon of a duck, which if you look at it again, it becomes a hare, and then it becomes a duck, and then it becomes a hare. Those kind of drawings that are ambiguous, and they can flip over from one meaning to another in front of your eyes. He wanted to examine what happened in between, when you're moving from one interpretation to another interpretation, what happens in that space in between, and that's the very space that for me is occupied by art, that kind of liminal space. But anyway, that's a slight distraction from wherever we were when we were.
I know I started it. I apologize, but I love it.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So you ended up at art college. Okay. So
yeah.
Let's go from there.
Okay. So I'm at art college, and suddenly it's a completely different world. And this was in the 60s. Yeah. I forgot to mention, when I got back from Germany, I needed to earn some money, and so I became a supply teacher in a school for a couple of months while I was getting stuff ready, which again was a big kind of learning curve. But slowly my hair started to get longer, and I got myself. I was in with a bit of a gang in the street anyway of motorcyclists, so I managed to get myself a nice motorbike, and we'd all seen Easy Rider, so all of the motorbikes we had tiny little moped wheels at the front and big fat tires at the back, and it's just proper choppers back in the day there. So I started to enjoy this other existence, which was amongst a lot of like-minded people who seemed to be quite anarchic. Another thing, little flashback I just had there was in the middle of my growing hippiness, I managed to get this outfit made of kind of green silk, a bit like Sergeant Pepper's, that kind of stuff, And I went to visit my mother, and I got out of this car that I've got, this old knackered car, and she said, "Oh, come in quickly in case the neighbors see you." She was so worried that this strange-looking, long-haired hippie, was the neighbors were going to see me come in. So, but anyway, that was good, and I kind of did quite well. I mean, I was so grateful, to be able to be painting and drawing full time, that I worked very, very hard, and I got rewarded for that. So I got a number of prizes and stuff, and in fact, when I graduated, the local newspaper came round, and they took a photograph of me. And instead of being like, the artist with a beret and a palette and some brushes and so on, at the time I was working on these 20-foot canvases using buckets, like pouring the paint. And so I insisted on being photographed holding a bucket, instead of like a palette. And so I didn't, and never really looked. I looked more like a window cleaner actually than an artist. But I remember the principal did say he'd never come across anybody who worked so hard. So I felt rather flattered by that. And so anyway, I got to the end of that and graduated. And then I got offered two places, one at the Slade School of Fine Art for postgraduate or the Royal College of Art for postgraduate. And I decided the Slade was for 2 years and the Royal College was for 3 years. And I thought, I'm so mature and, I'm such an accomplished, well-formed artist who's going to be a household name any second now, that I best do the 2-year one instead of the 3-year one, because otherwise it would, somehow restrict my movement up the ladder of importance. So I went and did the Slade. Of course, the other things didn't quite pan out. But again, when I got to the Slade, the work I was doing was so big that they didn't have enough studio space. So they paid rent for me to have a railway arch as a studio, and then I was allotted. I was given a personal tutor, Keith Vaughan, who was quite a well-known kind of figurative artist from a previous generation, and he came up to see my work in the studio one day, and I could tell for the first couple of minutes, that we were on a completely different planet. He didn't understand what I was on about, and I certainly didn't like his work. So they left me alone for those 2 years, just to get on with my work. And then at the end of the 2 years, I put up an exhibition, and it was. I won a scholarship from that, so it clearly went down okay. But it meant that I didn't actually have very much input from the Slade, but it turned out okay. Yeah, so when I left the Slade, that was funny. Again, I had to earn some money, so I got this job 2 days a week teaching pottery and art in a girls' school, just to keep me going. And the Centrinians films, you know them? Centrinians, it's about this girls' school, and they all misbehave terribly. So it's a kind of a comedy film, but it was a bit like that, because I remember teaching pottery to these girls, and there were about 20, 15-year-old girls, and they just went out of control. I mean, I was young, and I had no discipline over them at all. And I remember the headmistress coming in to see how I was getting on. And the first thing she did was put a hand on a big blob of clay on the doorknob as she came in. And then she looked up, and one of the girls thought it was a good idea to stand on the spinning wheel, the potter's wheel, and do pirouettes. And it was, so that was another good old sacking I got, because I did pick up one or two useful rejections in the past. But that carried on. And then I got, for some reason, there was this other artist, a well-known artist, who recommended me to this head of Liverpool College of Art, that I could be a good associate lecturer. So he came to the studio and he gave me this job, which meant 2 days a week I would drive up to Liverpool and teach. And that gave me, more money than I'd ever had, I think, at the time. And still, plenty of time, because I'd always vowed never to spend more than 50% of my time doing anything other than painting. It would never reach that. So I was perfectly happy with that proportion, whatever. I'm not good with numbers now, but whatever 2/7 is as a percentage, then that seemed to be, a reasonable thing to do. And so I did that for 5 years. But of course, I forgot. As soon as I started to earn money up there, out it went, because up in Liverpool, they're big drinkers up there. And so I drank pretty much everything I earned the first 6 months of the job. And then one day I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm traveling up from London to Liverpool, spending a lot of time traveling. Why don't I get somewhere halfway? So I thought I'd get somewhere halfway. So I kind of looked on the map, and there was this county, Herefordshire, in the middle of Great Britain. And so I found out that there was this mission hall, this kind of old school in the middle of the country that was being auctioned. So I thought, I'll go down to the auction. And so I kind of drove down with a friend to the auction. Not really serious about it. But anyway, I sat at the front of the auction, and there were all the kind of local yokels behind me, all straw coming out their ears and everything. And he kind of went on, and he got up to 5,000. And then I thought, I've got to put a bid in, otherwise it's a waste of time. So I put my hand up and I bid 5,500, and expecting, the yokels behind me to start going, I don't know, 6,000, something like that. Keep our cows in there or something. And anyway, nobody came to it. So they went bang, bang, bang. Right, sold to the person at the front of the store. So I said, what do I do now then? And he said, well, you've just bought it. You've got to give us 10%, £550. So I said, that's because I actually, one of the things I had learned, you can't use this in the interview, of course, is bullshit. So I said, yeah, not a problem at all. I'll write you a check out now. So I wrote the check, £550, gave it to him, and off we went. And I had a month to find the rest of the money, but I didn't even have £550 in my account. In fact, I had about £20 in my account. So then I phoned up everybody I knew and said, can you lend me £50? Can you, until I got enough to cover the check, because I knew it would be 5 days before the check got honored. So anyway, that got honored. And then I had another 3 weeks left to come up with the rest. And so I went down to the local authority and said, look, I've just at an auction, I've just acquired this place with no roof, no water, no electricity, lovely looking place, middle of the country. Can you help me out? And they said, yes, we'll give you a mortgage. We want people like you around here, artists, a bit of culture. So they very generously gave me this mortgage at 14.75%, which was quite a massive amount. But I was just absolutely over the moon that I could actually see it through and not just lose the deposit. So next stage was go there, because I hadn't actually seen the place. I'd seen a photograph of it, but I hadn't actually visited the place before I bought it. So I thought I'd best go and see what it looks like. So I went, and of course it was like, those fairy tales with brambles everywhere. You couldn't find the door, and you expected to find, some sleeping princess somewhere. But there was no sleeping princess, just a whole load of kind of weird things around. So I thought, I'll have to get a caravan first of all then, because I can't even kind of get in. So I saw this advertisement for a on-site caravan that you could buy, that you couldn't tow it, but they would deliver it. £80 it was. So they delivered it, and they delivered it on the common. And I had this tiny little car. And so I thought, I'll drag it into the garden, because dragging it into the garden, at least I'll clear some of the brambles. So I kind of hooked it up to the front of what was a Austin 1100 there, put it in reverse, and then revved up and went back like that. And of course, the inevitable happened, was that what was a flat-fronted car now looked like a boat. It just kind of pulled the front of it out completely, and the caravan didn't move an inch. But I didn't realize that I was being watched by the locals, who were laughing a bit, but they were very nice people. So the one guy came around and said, I'll give you I've got a tractor. So So anyway, he came round and he dragged it in for me. And then I spent, five happy years there until I had to, I got this letter from Liverpool College of Art, not a sacking letter, the opposite, which was equally as distressing. It said, "You've been with us now 5 years and we're very happy with your work. You are now permanent." And it made me, I almost came out in a rash, I felt kind of a bit ill at that. So I thought I'll have to leave. So I handed in my notice, and left. And then I thought, what should I do? So there were other things going on as well. So I thought, okay, I'll sell the place and then move to somewhere where nobody else wants to live, which is cheap enough, and then just carry on painting. And then I went to the local garage to pick up a newspaper, and they hadn't got my newspaper that I wanted, the one with the topless woman on page 3 and stuff like that. They only had like the serious things there. And and in it said, fellow in fine art, applications, Nottingham University. So I thought, I'll give that a shot, So I applied for that, and I got shortlisted for the interview, and I had no experience of anything like that. So they said, bring some examples of your work. So I hired this big lorry, and I took about 6 10-foot paintings with me for this interview, and a big projector, which I borrowed, with slides. You probably don't understand that. Slides, transparencies, little kind of actual images. And so I put those in, and I went for this interview with all the, I think there were 6 professors there from the university. And this one professor kept annoying me. I was talking about the paintings and stuff, and he kept asking me to define words like arbitrary, randomness, stuff like this. And he was really cramping my style, So anyway, I ended up having a row with him, and I thought, that's it, I've shot it now. Especially I was halfway through, the projector broke down. So I couldn't even carry on with that. I had to start talking in front of the paintings, of what was there. So I went out, and there were the other 5 people there, and they said, how did it go? And I said, yeah, I'll start packing up now, So I started to kind of pack up, and then I couldn't believe it. And they said, Mr. Taborn, can you come back in? And then they said, well, we'd like to offer you the fellowship. It's same rate as a senior lecturer, and you get a studio. I said, I would do it for nothing, because it meant a free studio, and they said, we should have told us before, we could have saved a few pound here, But anyway, they were truly welcoming, and it was a bit of a dream come true, because it was 3 years of being artist in residence in the university, and the university itself had no practical department at all. It only did history of art, and so it meant that I was like, I suppose, like a panda or something like that. Something to be kind of looked at, some strange creature in this studio, that they could also send students up to, if they had any kind of methodological problems, they wanted to understand some aspect of what a painter does. And so that was, and the only other commitment I had was an exhibition every year, and they had a beautiful gallery. So it was very, very good, and it gave me the chance really to experiment without restriction, because I had enough money for the materials, and then I started exhibiting a bit there and won a couple of prizes.
What year was this, David?
This was 1979 to 1971, because I left the Slade in 1972, moved into the Mission Hall in 1973, and was there until 79, and then the university was 79 to 81. That's right. Yeah. And yeah, and also I did. They said, "Oh, would you do maybe a life class?" Because some of the students there who just do art history and some of the staff would quite like to learn how to draw. So I set up a little life class every Thursday evening, which they paid me extra for as well. I would have done that for nothing as well. But by that time, I was smart. I said, "Don't keep saying I'll do it for nothing." So, and I remember the professor and his name. You couldn't make it up really. His name was Alex Smart, Professor Alex Smart. Smart Alec. You know, it's true. Yeah, Professor Alex Smart. I couldn't believe it. I thought he was joking. And anyway, he turns up. He wants to do a bit of drawing, in the life class, and he's spent his lifetime doing a bit of drawing here. And he brought out this tiny pencil, and I never thought of a correlation, a phallic correlation between the size of a pencil, except that it clearly existed in this case, And so he got this tiny little pencil out, and he's sharpening it, and he drew like an architect, if you know what I mean, And I said, look, Alex, because I called him Alex, I said, what about this? Why don't you borrow my big fat pencil? And also, why don't you not sit down when you're drawing? Why don't you stand up? That way you can step back and you can move around, Because it was like something you find in an amusement arcade, where you put a penny in, and they knock nails in shoes or whatever. Am I going too fast through my life for you, or too slow?
This is perfect. I love it.
So anyway, got to the end of that, and that was good. And so then I thought, what now? So I got 2 kids by then, because I in the intervening period, I'd had many incidences with the opposite sex. And so one of them resulted in, marriage, and then I had 2 children, and we were there, and said, what should we do after? And I said, well, I'd quite like to move back down to London, really, because it's just good to see galleries and stuff like that. So we moved back down to London, and then I was on this visiting circuit. The way the system used to go then was that you would be offered, a day as a visiting lecturer, and you'd go and you'd do a tutorial with maybe half a dozen students, and it would be you were the full-time artist coming in and doing tutorials as against the full-time staff who would be there doing the other stuff. And so I used to do that at various different colleges, Birmingham, Nottingham, some in London. And that was okay. That was okay for a while, and then I thought, no, I'll just go with the painting. So I kind of carried on painting, and then that's when I worked out this system, this cosmic system, because if I'm nothing, I am a cosmologist. And so I worked out that if you're broke and you keep the faith, then a minute before midnight, something will turn up, and that's what's happened ever since. I get broke, nothing's happening. And then just when I'm kind of reached, when I'm maxed out on my credit cards or something comes tapping at the window, and says, oh, here's some money for you, and so that's what happened, really. I got a bit broke, but then I got, exhibitions. Oh, and Factual Nonsense, the gallery, and so on. That was the next thing there. While I was at the Slade, this judge and his wife started to buy some work from me, and they invited me to. They got divorced. That's right, and then she was getting remarried, so she invited me to the wedding, and there she had her son Joshua, who then was 17 years old, and he came up to me in the bar and he said, he's very, very posh, Joshua. And he said, have you got an agent? And I said, no, because you don't really get agents in the art world. He said, well, can I be your agent? And I said, yeah, help yourself, And so anyway, off he went. And I thought nothing of it. And then about 6 months later, he said, I've got you an exhibition venue. So he managed to get me an exhibition. And then he got me a couple of sales and so on. And then we kind of built up this, good kind of working relationship. And then he wanted to open his own gallery. And so we found somewhere in Hoxton. And he wanted to call it Factual Nonsense because I'd done a painting the previous year, which I'd called Factual Nonsense. Again, descriptive of Wittgensteinian space, this kind of in-between space. And so he said, could he call it Factual Nonsense? And I said, yeah, as long as people know, that I didn't kind of call the painting after the gallery, because that would have been, so undignified, wouldn't it? It would have been different type of nepotism. In fact, that's a good case to get another word into the equation. May I just interject with one of my favorite words, which is palindrome? Yeah. And, I'm kind of a little bit obsessed with palindrome, partly because, in a world of asymmetry, then symmetry is such a beautiful thing. And, you probably know already the longest palindrome. Can I say it? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. And it's a narrative palindrome, which I love, which is a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. Yeah. So if you write that down, it's a beautiful symmetrical palindrome. Yeah. A man, a plan, a canal, Panama. And you can test that. And by the time we come to the end of the interview, if you get it right, there are prizes because, you can take anything off the top shelf.
David, I'm sure you're aware of the word for a fear of palindromes, right?
For which?
A fear of palindromes?
A fear of palindromes?
Yeah.
Palindromophobia?
I think it's technically called abophobia.
Is it really?
Yeah, which is a palindrome in itself.
Oh, you must be so proud of your boy. Huh? And I tell you, you must give him a lot of free time.
Yeah, way too much.
way too much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I forgot where we were now. I didn't mean to say it.
The exhibition and Joshua.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, with Joshua. Yeah. So we had the inaugural exhibition there, which was I also titled the painting "A Guide for the Perplexed," and so that was the exhibition. The first exhibition was called "A Guide for the Perplexed," and that was kind of pretty well received, and we did. He organised a retrospective which travelled to Germany and in different parts of Great Britain, as well as his gallery. So that was a good relationship. But he sadly, after I think we'd been together about 4 or 5 years, and we had a little bit of a Barney, a little bit of an argument. And we kind of fell out for a few months, but then thanks to his mother, she wanted us to kind of make friends again. So we kind of made friends. But then before we got to meet for the last time, he died. He was 26 years old, and he had he got a few bad habits. And anyway, he kind of lived in the gallery, slept above where my paintings were kept. There was a little kind of sleeping area there, and he'd gone to see coincidentally he'd gone to see the Basquiat exhibition at the Serpentine, and of course Basquiat was also 26 when he died, and Joshua had had a lot to drink, imbibed a lot of stuff, and also he got into the habit, I think, of taking a little nip of something before he fell asleep, So anyway, he must have either intentionally or unintentionally choked on his own vomit, and on the Tuesday, but he wasn't found until the Saturday, because the people were saying, "Oh, the gallery's not open," and it wasn't until they kind of broke in and found him. So that was a great sadness, because he went to he studied painting for a bit, but then he studied history of art at the Courtauld Institute. And he was very, very good. And in fact, he organized the Courtauld Institute, of course, was a very, very traditional place to study history of art. And their history of art pretty much ended with Cubism. They didn't kind of move up very far. So when he was a student, he organized what became known as the East Wing Collection, where he got contemporary artists, myself included, and he organized an exhibition in the Courtauld of contemporary work, which still goes on. So he was very instrumental in moving some of the traditional kind of academic constraints that history of art departments sometimes tend to have. Because I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but it tended to be very much a kind of a chronological sequence if you were studying history of art. So you go in the first year, and you'd be studying old art. Second year you'd be studying not quite so old art. And then in the third year, you'd be rushing straight up to kind of Cubism and Dadaism and a bit of Futurism. And then I think it ended at the end of the First World War, the studies. So he managed to bring about some enlightenment there. But as I say, he died, and that was very sad. And in fact, he's still spoken of greatly. And there is a website that still uses Factual Nonsense, which is run by someone I exhibited with at Joshua's, in order to keep the whole kind of ethos going, which was very good. Yeah. So anyway, that kind of finished. And what happened then? Something else happened. Oh, yes. Then I got nominated for, then I was broke again. Then I got nominated for a Nestor Fellowship. Now, Nestor stands for the National Endowment for Science, Technology, and the Arts, and it was basically set up with lottery money, and it was to give people a chance to develop their work and hopefully cross-pollinate, the other disciplines, science and technology. So I was nominated, and then given this 3-year another 3-year fellowship. But it had, you stayed in your own studio, but it's just they gave you plenty money to develop your work, and so that took care of another 3 years. That was 2003 by that time, to 2006. And then as soon as that finished, I stumbled across a fellowship in Brooklyn at the Urban Glass place, where they were. I saw this advertisement, and it said, "We're looking for an established artist fellow to join, do this fellowship, and he or she doesn't need to know anything about glass or neon or anything to do it." So I thought, I'm your man. If ever anybody, was endowed with ignorance of what glass does, it was me. I mean, the closest I'd come to glass, and it really was close, was when I was carrying a big watercolor, and the wind blew it, and it smashed in my face, and I kind of cut the side of my face, and I went into the office and said, and the secretary kind of fainted. This was at the university. And I went into the lavatory and looked in the mirror. And when I smiled, there was this other smile the side of my face opened up as well. Yeah, because with glass, you don't feel anything. It's so sharp. So anyway, I didn't use that as part of my preamble at Urban Glass Studios, but it meant that I could go over there without really knowing anything about glass, and they wanted somebody to go in because they're full of kind of techies, who can blow glass and slump glass, do neon, with all the kind of craft skills that are necessary. But I think they wanted some conceptual input, from somebody who might say, oh, I wonder what would happen if you did this, or is this possible, So I went over and did that, and that was such a lovely time I had there. People were really nice, and oh yeah, I enjoyed it as well. The capgrass syndrome. That it's imposter syndrome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I used to walk. I had this apartment in Flatbush, and I used to walk to the studio in Brooklyn, and I used to have to walk over this kind of zebra crossing thing, past the GI recruitment place, and I always wore camouflage trousers then and a t-shirt, and I got my baldy head and everything, and almost every day some young recruit would go, oh, sir, and like salute me as I was crossing over the road, and I just kind of go, because I thought if I speak, I'll have an English accent, and my cover will be blown, and I can no longer pretend that I'm some member of the special forces, like I'm a SEAL or I don't know, whatever they are, whatever animal they call themselves. Yeah. And so that was also part of it. And then I got from that subsequently, they wanted me to have a show in the Robert Lehman Gallery. Yeah. And this was for 2008, Easter of 2008. And I don't know if you remember the Easter of 2008, but that was when the Lehman Brothers collapsed and the world collapsed. Everything, entropy ruled that particular moment. And so
I remember that very well.
Yeah, well, I just put up all my paintings and all my artworks and my neon pieces in this exhibition. And everybody was kind of running out of their offices, with the boxes of stuff that they got, mainly tissues and everything. But it meant that nobody was buying anything. And so that was it, really. Didn't sell a thing. And then came back to London. That was 2008. Yeah. And it's been vicissitudinal ever since, because that's another nice word, isn't it? I like nice words.
It sounds like you like nice words.
I like nice words. Yes. Oh, that's partly why I did this sojourn, this kind of distraction into the world of books. Quite some years back now, about 5 years ago, I think, something like that. And that was partly because I love words and I've never used them in the work I do. And in fact, it's almost been a battle to rid myself of any of those kind of narrative associations or figurative associations within the work. I always was a bit of a purist in that sense, having been influenced by abstract expressionism and post-painterly abstraction, all that kind of stuff, where you didn't want anything to associate itself imagistically, with the look of the real world. And I remember doing a few watercolors, and I ended up writing, I wish I could use words, something really banal, childish, and like a very high cringe quotient. And I remember doing that, and then, this is no good. And then my second wife, Vanessa, gave me this book that she'd come across, a kind of a law book, And so I thought, yes, so I opened this law book up, And I wanted to make it kind of float in a cage. So I made this metal cage, two metal cages, one on top of the other, because I've always been obsessed with wallness, with windowness, So we'll probably get onto Barnett Newman's quote, which you asked for, so some kind of telling quote. Well, before we got onto that telling quote, one of his other famous quotes is when he defines sculpture as being something that you bump into when you're stepping back to admire a painting. Yeah. And so the implications there are that, something which doesn't require you to suspend disbelief and to believe that you're moving via 2 dimensions into 3 dimensions, and you're climbing through this window, which is what wall pieces and paintings do, but that it's kind of sculptural, and that's its limitation, which I don't fully subscribe to, but is a kind of a useful clause. So because I wasn't able to use the words in the way that somebody like Anselm Kiefer might use in his paintings, I always felt very self-conscious about that. So then I started manipulating these books, and I got this book that got given me, and so I set it in. Moire Patterns. Do you know those? Well, if you very often see them if you've got two sets of either vertical lines or grids, and they move in front of each other, they form this kind of silk-like movement. Have you ever seen that? Come across it?
I don't think so.
Sometimes, sometimes you'll be driving past a double mesh something, and you'll see it'll appear to kind of move,
right?
And that's called the Moire Effect, Moire. And so I wanted this effect. So I kind of captured this book, opened it up like a butterfly, and then I kept pouring resin, polyester resin, clear resin onto it until all the pages became translucent. And so that it was all gobbledygook, this law book, except that the one recurring thing that was legible was ART, because that would be the start of Article 5, Article 6, in the law book. And so all you saw was art, 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 art. And I thought, yeah, that's kind of, that will do for me. So I did that, but it then led me to kind of look at books as objects, but also I saw them both as objects and as kind of pixels, if that makes sense. So that when I was working on an individual book, I would be working on it in the way that one might acknowledge a single pixel as being part of a broader whole. So I had all the books around the studio like a murmuration. You know what a murmuration is? No? Nope. Oh, I can't tell you. I have to be a lexicon around it. No. Yes. No, a murmuration is, when all the birds form this organism, they're flying back and they create this flow. Starlings when dusk falls,
Right.
they fly and they appear to be like a jellyfish or something in the sky. Yeah, that's called a murmuration. And it's where the little bits and pieces come together to form an organism, a bigger organism of themselves. So anyway, that's the way I saw the books, and so I would work on each one, see what it fed me, whether the title affected me, whether the look of the book affected me, or whether I needed to invent something within that. And then I just kind of went around, modifying these things. Oh, and I ended up with my equivalent of a Kinder book. It's not very good on an interview, but I'll show you one of them. But you see this syringe, yeah? Well, the syringe is full of a ground book, albeit short story, yeah? So that you inject the book, the ground book. It's a kind of a Kinder equivalent, except that it's instant. You don't have to read the book. You simply, have it intravenously. So those were some of the different aspects of bookness that I was looking into, which again ultimately meant that I did 250 of them And then I thought, oh, I'll do a book of the books. So then I constructed this book full of images and little introductions to them. And that was called The Dado Rail of Delusion. There's one on the wall there. The Dado Rail of...
Okay.
Yeah. Now, the story behind that, you're not going to get a chance to ask questions, actually. With that one, I got the book done, and it was a limited edition of 100, and each one was going to be was specially constructed with little convex mirrors so that you saw your reflection inside the book, so that you're actually in the book itself. And I got all these set up, and then there's this Mayfair gallery, and they said, oh, yes, we'll have an exhibition in a launch in October. Show the books and launch the limited edition, and then tragedy struck, and the moneyed person behind the gallery sadly died, and the gallery closed, and so that's where it stands now. So I still have drawers full of limited edition books, and all these books. Although I've sold about 30 books over the years since, like separately to odd collectors, but that's always had to be put on a back burner. So one of these days, I'm hoping to do something with the book, because the book was finished, and then I started to kind of revisit canvases again, and started to rekindle my affection for gesturality and that type of haptic sensation that had been missing with the books. What I haven't mentioned, and it's kind of you to ask, was the Homunculus Period, which was in between Factual Nonsense and the books. And the Homunculus Period idea, I chose the kind of generic title Homunculus, really just because I saw each one of them as kind of some kind of self-portrait. But basically what I was doing was I was looking for some other means of expressivity other than paint and brushes, because I began to suspect that I was doing these kind of heavily pastos paintings and quite gestural, and that it was maybe not challenging enough. So I thought I'll try different methodologies, and so first one I did was I kind of painted on some metal and some wood and stuff, and then I got an angle grinder, and I kind of started drawing with the angle grinder. And then that led on to a whole new series where I was forever looking for a new way of making a mark, but also in a not dissimilar way. And my descriptions are quite Möbius, so you'll find that I'll start off on the outside and come back to the inside seamlessly. Is that I would bury things. I would have a sheet of wood or a piece of metal or something, and I would bury things, actual objects or colors, or I would route and fill it with polyester resin or epoxy resin, and then I would paint over it like a complete painting, so you would see nothing of it, and then I would begin to excavate, a bit like kind of archaeologists, so I'd start cutting back and finding these, what in my head were kind of absolutes, because they were there for all time, So I was going through this process of unearthing these things, which of course was a very kind of obvious analogy to the concept of deconstruction. And I'd always been enamored with painters like Bonnard or Gorky, where they would have layer upon layer upon layer, of scumbles and glazes and so on. And so you got to look at the surface And as you got closer to it, it would begin to unfold and you could peel back the various layers. And so you would be kind of doing what we all want to do eventually, which is turn the arrow of time round. So you would start looking back into the origin of the painting itself. And I've always enjoyed stuff, actual stuff, physicality, the materials or the tools or anything that you can actually touch, anything that is kind of antidotal to the virtual world that we are, as we speak now, inhabiting. And so I always wanted this manipulating stuff. So that meant a whole series of works were done using construction materials and pretty much everything. I was using welding, blow torches, and in fact, one of the biggest ones I did, because again, one of the definitions that I like about art is it's the difference between the intention and the result. So you're looking at what happens when an activity intervenes, and it takes you somewhere that you could never simply travel in a cerebral way. You arrive at it through this kind of physical narrative, if you like, this journey, of doing things. So that's trying to find something that would have that kind of tension of ambiguity that would excite me in the same way that, again, back to somebody like Bonnard, what would excite me is that I would go to, I would be 20 foot away from a Bonnard and I'll go, yes, I really kind of respond to the color and stuff like that. As I got closer and closer, the materiality of it would reveal itself. But not only that, so that not only would I begin to see, the layers underneath, but also I would begin to become conversant with Bonnard's attempt to introduce time into the equation. So, for instance, you'll be looking at a Bonnard, and there'll be you'll slowly notice that there's a little dog in the corner that's been painted pretty much the same color, the same tone as the background. So you don't notice it for quite some time. So it emerges afterwards. You also notice that the cups are tilted slightly upwards. The vessels are slightly upwards in a kind of oriental perspective way, so that you're not just looking at the object, but you're looking at what's inside them. So you're getting that kind of full narrative. And of course, one of the things that he always wanted in his work was he wanted to create an equivalent to going into a room full of people that you've never been into before. The way in which things slowly unfold and reveal themselves as you begin to settle down and you lose your self-consciousness, you begin to notice things. And so he wanted to emulate that, or try and find an experience, an equivalent experience to that sensation. And I've always found that as well. I want both things. I want the window to be a real window where something is going on in there, another world is going on there on the wall. And I also want to be rejected as soon as I get close enough to acknowledge the material that forms the painting itself. And so I get thrown out, and then I come back in and thrown out and back in. So it's this constant kind of bouncing backwards and forwards, this suspended disbelief, as it's often called, where you leave the one realm and you move into another realm, but as soon as you're in that realm, you're thrown back out again. And an Australian psychiatrist, I can't remember his name, psychologist rather, was describing why it is that humans need toys, and again, his simplistic description was that we need something to mediate between the interior reality and the exterior reality. So we have these toys that hover between the two types of reality, the subjective and the objective. And again, that's another reasonable definition of wherein art resides, for me anyway. you know. Sorry, you were asking another question.
Yeah, I'm curious about, you've got all these different layers, and then
Yeah.
I'm listening to you talk about it, and each layer unveiling another layer and another layer. Where do you start with something like that? I'm just trying to get your thought process.
Oh no, well again, it's one of the things that is common to every kind of art form, is that the bottom line is, you have to trust your responses. If it feels right, then it is right. Or I'm just going to contradict myself now. Or if it makes you feel perplexed, or if it makes you cringe, then it's likely to be even better than you expected. Because so many things I've done, I've looked at them and thought, oh, this is not good. And then I've kind of put it to one side and I've gone to work on another thing, because I tend to work on many things at the same time concurrently, so I would leave it for a bit. And then over a period of time, my peripheral vision would kick in and I'd start noticing it. And sometimes it would call me over and say, look, I want a bit of attention, so I would give it a bit of attention, either smack around the head, like irritated or something like that, just to get it to go, or do something else. But sometimes I would think, oh, that's not as bad as I thought it was, and then maybe a week later I'd go, oh, that's actually finished, even though it went in a different direction to the one that my head had constrained me to believe was the direction it was going in. So that's where the activity does come in. You see, it does take you somewhere. And also, when describing with Bonnard, how you introduce time into the equation, one of the things as well that always excited me from when I very first came across people like de Kooning, any of the abstract expressionists really, was the frozen moment, the gesture that is frozen in time. So with a de Kooning, a big sweeping movement of paint, or of multiple colors of paint across the surface, which would then dry, and that would be like frozen in time. That would be a moment that would be not just a moment like a lump of rock. It would be a moment like a choreographed dance. It would signify the speed at which that mark was made. And so you would suddenly find yourself looking at a painting as an orchestration, as a series of movements across the surface, as well as the other things, as well as the way they associate themselves, with the real world, the way the form goes, the relationship to the framing edge, which incidentally, I've always been a bit obsessed with the framing edge as well, because, the edge is where the one world ends. We're talking windows here, where the one world ends and the other world begins. And so I've always found myself, like, I go into a painting. In fact, my system for looking at art is very straightforward. I go into an exhibition, I almost sprint around it, 60 mile an hour, and I notice maybe two or three paintings. Then I go up and have a coffee, and then I come back down again, and then it's a bit like an interview, And I've shortlisted a few paintings unknowingly, and then I get drawn over to look more closely at a painting, and I look at the painting and I move around within those four corners. But then also I start traveling like a snail around the edge of it, almost seeing the kind of linear relationships of the color and so on to the framing edge itself. I think that's partly to do with my early interest in what was notionally called deductive structure, like Frank Steller and in fact our friend Barnett Newman, where you would have a structure which related to the framing edge itself. It would be verticals or horizontals, but somehow it would point to the extremities of the cage, if you like, or the arena in which the activity took place. And so the edge itself would seem to somehow amplify the objectness of the painting. without losing out on the wallness or the windowness, if that makes sense.
Hey there, guys and gals. That's it for part 1 of our interview with David Taborn. Make sure to tune in next time to hear the rest of the interview. As always, make sure to like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. That's enough for me, and I'll see you next time.